Okay, hi, everybody, both here personally and those who are watching on the recording. This is the first of a series of podcasts, not really presentations, between me and Tom Guild. And I wanted to give just a minute history of how this got set up and what we intend to do, and just a quick intro to Tom, and then I'll let him actually introduce himself, but talk a little bit about what the plan for both today and for the series is. Um, so I've known Tom for quite some time. He's been a very prolific author. Competitive Engineering was the book I read a ways back of his Evo system. And it's been the last 3 years he's had a much bigger influence on me. I realized there are as many different things as I've known and done. I had huge holes in what I even looked at, let alone what I knew. Uh, so we've gotten to be friends, and I joke Tom's like sometimes a friend, sometimes a father, sometimes a business associate, and just as often as not a big brother giving me unwanted but useful advice. And I got the idea that it'd be fun just to do this. So these are not scripted. I mean, we do talk a couple minutes about what we're going to talk about, and we actually just made a last minute change in the format here, which had been meant to be mostly a podcast type between me and him, but given that I don't expect to get lots of people today, and maybe even in the future, it's really for the recording and for the fun and learning. We're going to run this as an open discussion. We do have some overarching ideas, but I think what I'll do is I'll let Tom introduce himself. And then we started with actually some, just while we were waiting to get going, people asking questions. So I think we'll start with that. And then after we get a couple of those answered, we'll go into kind of my question that might kick off today. So Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself and your history, because you did a lot of stuff before Agile came into existence, and it's worth people knowing that, you should be known more than you are. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay. Born in Hollywood, quite literally. I lived in Malibu next door to Bing Crosby, who knew me as a young lad of 5. So yeah, and my mother was an actress, a playwright, and stuff like that, and even brought me onto the stage together with Ironsider Perry Mason, who directed our play, things like that. Hi, Tony. You're in the artistic business, huh? See you laughing
I
at that.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm a
Okay.
fan.
Anyway, at 15, my parents decided to emigrate to London, and which was a very interesting adventure. And 2 years later, I met my wife, who's in the next room. Okay. Lovely Norwegian lass, and I followed her up to Norway in 58. And in order to stay in Norway, I needed a job. My mom said, come back to Britain and do your university, or I'll cut you off without a penny. She was trying to motivate me to get a higher education, which fortunately I avoided largely. Didn't corrupt me. And so I went around looking for jobs, and there were some bad offers, like painting the sides of Norwegian ships, which and other things. But I went straight to IBM because I knew 2 things about them. They had a United Nations flag as their symbol, and their slogan was "World Peace through World Trade." And I was kind of idea, and they had these wonderful gadgets called computers. And I was a ham radio operator, K6GUV, in the US. So I was a techie from 10 years old. I had my license, put it that way. Anyway, and IBM gave me a test, and that was to translate the front page of the Norwegian newspaper after having been in Norway for 2 weeks, and I did it. And they said, "You look like a smart young lad, start tomorrow." And I started with punched cards. There were no electronic computers in Oslo. There was one in Bergen, the city, but this was, the transition from punch cards to electronic computers. And so I started with punch cards, which were, from an era 1890, Hollerith, 1930s, you name it. But I also programmed using plugs. And by the way, if you think about it, one plug at a time means Agile. You can iteratively try out your design and see if it works. Maybe I got some ideas from that. Anyway, we'll stop there. I'm gonna leap. You can read my biography on guild.com or other places. Just look it up. But I now am 83. Christmas Eve is my birthday. I'm retired. I'm totally uninterested in earning money. Have a very nice pension and other, finance. Great, except I did invest in Tesla again. And it was good last year, but it's not good yet. Anyway, I have info. But I have fair health for my age. I beat prostate cancer. Mention things we go through at this age, right? And but fortunately, my wife and I are like the only surviving people we know at our age. At least all the husbands are dead for all of her. We're at that age. Anyway, but what I do as a hobby, for the last 5 years, I have written 5 or more books each year. And if you think I'm joking, ask for them, or go to Lean Pub and find them, or something like that. Okay, and these are serious, deep books of 100 to 300 pages, things like that. Okay, that's what I do starting in July, my summer vacation. And but then I do other things, and I spend a lot of time talking with good people like Al, very intensively, going deep. And Al throws a lot of interesting ideas to me. And I like that he appreciates my ideas, because you have to be somebody who knows a lot to actually appreciate what I do. But I'm really happy to consider Al one person who is mature enough. I mean, he's still young, but mature enough to to understand what this is all about. I'm fanatically devoted to something called engineering. Now, we know the term software engineering. I mean, that's from the 60s, from the NATO conference. But one thing I figured out a long time ago is that if we're going to deal with large, complex systems, we have to have a real engineering discipline. And it's not software engineering as in coding, because that's what they did. They said software engineering, they meant coding, right? It's real engineering. Now, my father was an engineer and has 100 US patents to prove it. So it's in the blood. Okay. That's all about me for the moment.
Okay, great. So I tell you what, I have a question, but that I was going to start off with. Anybody listening here have excuse me, kind of a question they want to ask of Tom? The only thing that's off limits in these podcasts is politics. Everything else is okay. Okay, so I'm just going to throw that in the background. So anybody have a question? Just blurt it out.
Before I introduce somebody, I know you don't know Al. It's Juan Pham. And he is a deep student of mine here in Norway and a consultant. But he's here in Norway, and I'm glad to see my students showing up too.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad to have you here. Okay, well then I'll go ahead and ask.
But give him more time. I'm sure.
Okay, yeah, I cannot do that.
Yeah. More
okay.
patience. I think
I'll give you a minute,
Jeff,
though. You only got a minute, so jump in.
Jeff is there. Question.
Thank you.
Well, is Agile a disaster, and what should we do about it?
Okay. Agile as currently understood, okay, manifesto, Scrum, etc. Yeah, it is a disaster because it is we're wasting the opportunity to build really great, high quality, competitive systems. We're wasting that opportunity. We hardly know it. So yes, it's a historical, national, international disaster. Okay. What can we do about it? Oh my God. I know what the answer is, but the question is, will anybody listen? Will anybody do anything? So it's all down to what I've always said is the most powerful force of all: motivation. So one of my analysis is people are not motivated. You can put the answer right in front of them to save their lives, and they have excuses about why they don't want to save their lives. Okay, so we have a cultural problem. Now, sometimes a nice little war sorts that out. It's amazing how motivation changes when the barbarians are at your gates. Okay, maybe we've had too long a nice run in peacetime that no matter what stupid things you do, things go pretty well. And the barbarian isn't literally at our door in California yet. Okay. But we have a neighbor here in Norway called Russia. Okay. Now, okay. So let me lay on the table. The problem is motivation, and there is, I know of no easy fix, but I'm suggesting that a third world war would probably motivate people to do much better engineering assistance. You know, wake them up as done before. But I don't really want the third world war. The question is, short of the third world war, how do we motivate people? And I have a fear, and the answer is there is no good answer, and there's not going to be. And it may literally, if history is any guide, go 100 years or more before people start seriously picking up some of my engineering ideas. And that's okay. That's one reason I'm writing all these books. I'm not writing them for you now. Enjoy, share, okay? I'm writing them hoping somebody will pick them up in 100 years or 200 years and say, now is the time. We are now grown up. We will now take building systems seriously and do a first-class job, and hope we can avoid the Third World War on the way. That's my short answer. Isn't that disheartening?
A little bit, but to the point at the same time. Susan, I see your hand up, but actually Marcelo had a question in the chat, so I'm going to read that and then you'll go after that. He asked, Agile and value creation in hardware and big bureaucratic companies, what challenges and solutions? Examples from the real world.
Oh, long question and many.
It's in the chat if you want to look at it too.
Oh, thank you. I think I shall.
It is a long question.
Yeah,
I ask Tom long questions all the time, and then he tells me, okay, now let's break this down. He never answers long questions, but you kind of have two in there, so he'll read it and break it down.
Yeah.
One thing I've learned from Tom is he might ramble on and on, but he doesn't let me do that. He makes me be very concise.
Okay, check. Finally found it. And okay, Marcelo. And I got to get Marcelo's face in front of me.
Yeah, I can show myself if you want.
Yes,
please do.
Nice.
I think so. If you're not shy.
Can you see me?
All right,
Marcelo. Nice.
Can you see me now?
We see you now. Okay, now. Okay. Now, I would first say that your first word is disturbing to me because I think it is trivial. I think it doesn't deserve the attention it's been getting. Well, now your second term, value creation, does deserve. Yeah, you know, that is, in my opinion, the big thing. And I would say if we can get great value creation with no form of agile whatsoever, that's good. And if we need some form of agile to improve our value creation, that's good agile. And the current agile that most people know, all known forms of it, let's say from Scrum to SAFe, etc., are not even trying to get value creation. They don't even have a discipline that people follow of stating which values they want. Now, SAFe has actually adopted my language method for doing it with scales of measure. If it's buried in there, I'd have to give you the link, but it's really there. But that doesn't mean anybody does it when they do SAFe, okay? So wherever I go, I see that people don't even know how to state a value requirement in a clear way so we can engineer and deliver and measure that we're delivering the value. Okay? So so the Agile we know populated is disconnected from the idea of value creation. They mention value often, although I think most people interpret that as financial value and say, yeah, if we just code well enough with fewer bugs, we will become rich. That's it. I think that's their middle picture, but it isn't even clear what it is. Anyway, now in hardware and big bureaucratic companies, the one thing I believe that Agile, as we know it, has totally missed the ball on is thinking at the systems level. Okay, if you take a close look, it's all about coding and coding and coding. It's not even about data. It's about coding and coding and coding. I mean, how narrow-minded can you get? It's not even about the requirements for coding. Forget that. Okay, so it's about as narrow-minded and suboptimal as it possibly can get, led by people like my dear friend Kent Beck, who stated at a dinner we were having, "I'd rather be coding. You know, I don't want to do this XP stuff anymore. I'd rather be coding." I mean, these guys are who behind the Agile Manifesto. They're in love with coding for some psychological reason, and they would rather be coding. You don't have to look at them on X and LinkedIn. They're still talking about coding. Now, so hardware introduces the idea that there's more than coding. There's hardware, there's data, there's peopleware, there's cultureware, there is legalware, and all of it intermixed. So very simple idea we have to adopt is people talk about systems thinking, but they're not really thinking of the system. Okay, so we need to understand that absolutely everything that can contribute to value is on the agenda. Nothing is excluded. And I mean magic Harry Potter is not excluded if it contributes to the value. Now, challenges and solutions. Well, challenges is like trying to convert a carpenter into a mechanical engineer. Okay. And in a way, it's two different cultures and maybe even two different brains. Okay. What I've learned is those companies that have really adopted my methods very well, like Intel, Hewlett Packard, to name some, are engineering companies, and everybody there has an engineering degree. Okay, so they immediately understand what I'm onto. And the guys who have no engineering training and have become hotshot coders, sorry, it's just alien. We have the wrong people in place making decisions about how to build systems. Okay, now, so challenge is cultural, challenge is educational, and both of these will take many more decades before it's half solved. Okay. Examples from the real world. Well, don't get me started. Let me suggest that all of my books contain case studies from real companies in depth. You can begin with competitive engineering, and Al will put a digital copy of competitive engineering in our giveaway to people who attend, and you only have to scan it. There are very many real life case studies there, is all I can say. I think it's, by the way, when I find people talking about this stuff in, say, LinkedIn and X, and they do not give any case studies or even reference to case studies, then I'm very suspicious that they don't know what they're talking about, certainly not from real experience, and that their methods don't do any good, but they don't know it because they don't have any experience or data from real life stuff. I do, in, let's say, over 100 published case studies. Easy. Okay, I have a huge collection. But take a very simple example. I'm we're reading about Boeing and its quality control problems and its executive problems. Okay, in 1990, at both McDonnell Douglas Aircraft and later at Boeing, I introduced all of my methods. They actually paid me a fortune to train their trainers in my methods. Okay, and we did things like the engineering drawings that had about 90 defects per drawing. We used inspections of the drawing to reduce the defects down towards about 3 within 3 months. That's a case study. That's published. That's real. Okay, and I have masses of those. They're necessarily time consuming and we have a limited time. Therefore, I'm just referring to my writings. Okay. I'll stop
Thank
there.
you.
I hope that, okay, Marcelo. Is Marcelo happy?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
That's
Thank
good.
you very much.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Susan, thanks for waiting. Why don't you ask your question?
Yes. You've talked about culture a number of times, and one of the things that I read an interesting book recently by I can't remember all the authors, Suzanne Robertson, Jane Robertson, Tom DeMarco, the people in the Atlantic System Guild, basically. It's called Culture Killers, and their point is that a lot of times it's deliberately unsaid, the things that are making a toxic culture, and that if they are said, it can cause some insight. Have you ever done anything like that? I've never done anything like that, so that's one of the reasons I'm interested in this.
Yeah. You know, in parallel with my work at IBM, I started the University of Oslo. And amongst the subjects I spent 1 year on was psychology and 2 years on sociology. So in theory, I'm educated in culture. And I have to admit, I recognize it as something so terribly complicated and deep that I do not feel I am an expert on it at all. I feel I know, I understand it very little and I can do very little with it. And I actually cop out and do things like, well, if I can clarify the requirements, that will help the culture work together. You know, so I'm at the level of quantified values and qualities, and that's my solution to culture. Of course, it isn't a cultural solution, but it does oil the machinery of the culture. People can work on the same team together, having a common goal that they actually understand because it's clear as opposed to bullshit. Okay, so let me cop out on culture, and you mentioned some very good people there, like Tom DeMarco, good old friend of mine, and he quoted in his one of his early books, Gild's Law, which he picked up at a conference from me, and it says that you can always find a way of quantifying any quality. So that's what he picked up. I don't know, Susan. I feel that you're probably asking the wrong guy, but we can make a nice long list of people who deal with culture, you and I. Follow-up questions are allowed. If I haven't quite satisfied.
The only way I have ever changed things is by dealing with people on an individual basis. I've never changed the culture of a company, but I've sometimes changed the culture of a team. But it has to do with recognizing people's individual strengths and using that.
Okay, I will now tell a little story to answer the question. So I was working at McDonnell Douglas and had succeeded in reducing the engineering defects in the engineering paper. So I was sort of a hero, and they said, "What other magic tricks can you do, Tom?" And I said, "Well, there's this thing they found at IBM called defect prevention process, DPP, yeah, by Mays and Jones. And you can look that up. And I haven't. It sounds. The idea is very simple. You go to the grassroots, the people who create the problems and the designs, the engineers, and you find some defects that they've committed, and you ask them, what could we do in our culture to prevent the defect from happening? Okay. And I said, I'd like to experiment with that and see what happens. Okay. So we're in about 1991. Okay. And I got a group of about 4 very smart young engineers, only been there a year or two. But, and I said, okay, we know we have a very important engineering problem to reduce the number of defects that get into engineering drawings and part specifications. We have a flood of them. It's the same flood that they're talking about now of defects at Boeing. Okay? And they said, oh, sure, that's easy. We suggest that we build a $10 million IT system to filter what engineers write and find the defects. I said, that's called megalomaniac. You already have such projects led by NASA administrators, and they have totally failed already. Okay? Think simple. And notice what I'm doing. I'm changing the culture. They have a megalomaniac, big bang culture. Okay? And the solution is a huge project that will fail. Okay? Think simple. Keep it, don't do anything you can't build yourself at home. I told them. I was changing the culture of the team, Susan. You know what they did? I came back a month later and they said, we found that if we had a template which overlaid the engineering specifications and had a cutout where you could specify something, and a little piece of advice that only A, B, and C are valid here, and we laid it over, we tested. It would radically reduce the defects. It beat any other form of training and handbooks that they had, because they didn't get good enough training, they didn't remember it, and the handbooks were too big and they didn't have one. But now, another month went by, they had 19 plastic colored templates distributed to 2,500 engineers at McDonnell Douglas Aircraft in El Segundo, and they were overlaying their work. And they measured very carefully their ideas, that the defect rate of the prevented defects, not detected and corrected, but prevented defects, went from about 90 down to 3 in any engineering drawing. And that's how I changed the culture overnight. I've got a write-up of that case study if anybody needs it.
Yeah, Thomas, I see you have a question, but I wanted to riff a little bit on something Tom said and maybe inject a little thought in what you did. I do agree you changed the culture, but I think you really changed it through action first. You gave them a handle on things. Let me explain this. Actually, I riff off Jerry Sternen's comment. It's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than think your way into a new way of acting. Because while the question was being asked and you're answering, and I was kind of riffing through my past experiences with companies where I would say some permanent shift happened. And in every case, and it's interesting, the comment about individual, in every case, there was an opening maybe of general understanding because of the engagement I had. I do think I had some impact in opening some ideas, but in reality, it was almost always one person or maybe a couple of people that shifted and started acting differently. Very often as a director or manager, I've had most success when directors and managers lead, not just step back and support. This idea that the teams will do it I have no evidence for that. But what happened is, like, I remember one case, a guy got his company's division, rather his group, that if you didn't understand why something was of value, don't work on it. that has amazing ramifications, because if you're a developer and you don't quite understand why it's a value, you can't write your code. You got everybody to agree with this, and a small group changed how they work. So the culture did change of that little group, but out of the actions. Another guy, I remember we did a product management workshop, and he totally got the concept of small delivery, and he changed his group of 300 people with that concept. So culture and action are related to each other. And when you say, I've heard a lot of stories from Tom about doing something simple and getting like almost something you think will take months and months, literally getting it next day or next week because they just weren't thinking about it. That I think it's that shock to the system. Tom can be a shock to the system by giving a little idea and you wondered, what the hell happened here? How were we able to do this? That was so good. How can we do it again? I think that's maybe the shift that's needed. Wow, that was cool. How can we do that again? So you could respond to this. I just want to interject that. And after, if you have a response after that, I will let Thomas go.
Okay. No, thank you. I'd prefer to go on to the next question, which,
Okay.
let's see,
Yeah,
Thomas.
Yeah, why don't you just
put in
read it,
there.
Thomas? Why don't you ask
Yeah,
it?
sure. I'm mostly interested, Tom, in your impressions about the impact of generative AI in the field of software engineering, say over the course of 5 to 10 years.
Okay. So first, is there really a field of software engineering? Not the one that people talk about. As I said before, that just amounts to fancy coding. There is no engineering in, for example, I talked to the people who coined the term, Dijkstra, in the software engineering NATO conferences in the 60s. And he said to me directly and personally, we brought in the term software engineering to con NATO into funding our conference. It had no real existence. So software engineering began as a con, and I'm afraid it continues as a con. Now, I don't think software engineering is so interesting. I think systems engineering, which is a real discipline. Go to INCOSE, International Council on Software Engineering.org, to find the whole culture, which I've been a member of for many years. And you have a real systems engineering culture. And that systems engineering necessarily contains some software which necessarily gets engineered. Okay? But the people who we normally associate with, let's call them people in the Agile culture for the moment, they have no knowledge whatsoever or interest in engineering of any kind. Full stop. They merely misuse the term. So anyway, so I've taken a look at AI and what it can do. I haven't actually had to generate programs, but I've messed about with it a bit, and I've looked at what people say who have tried to generate software. And I'll make a long story short. When I ask AI questions like, give me a list of 10 critical qualities for code, and quantify them like I do in language with a scale of measure, the AI system will give me a much better answer than any of my students could ever give. So I have no doubt whatsoever, and I could go on and on and on. I have a booklet we can share, or you can ask me for, called Resilience Engineering, where I compare my manual attacks on resilience with ChatGPT's attack on the same thing. And ChatGPT was better than anything I found or could do in doing a real engineering structuring of the problem. So the crude AI that we have today is capable of using my planning language or language methods. It knows about them. It does them with a vengeance better than any single student I've ever trained. So the answer is there is some real systems engineering already built into, you just have to ask AI. And by the way, this same AI is capable of generating code. Now, what I don't know, and we haven't proven, is if I say I need 65% usability on some scale of measure, and I feed it to say the AI, do it, so be it. I have not seen, we have no examples of anybody actually generating levels of quality which are measurable. But I think it thinks it knows how to do it. But we have yet to prove it. Too early days. But there's hope. Certainly the whole engineering process already done. You can read about it in the resilience engineering booklet, which I'll send over to Al right now, and you can get it on request from me. By the way, tom@guild.com. If you want to just say, please send me X, I'll be happy to do it. Okay, next 5 to 10 years. Yeah, I can't imagine. I should add, when I then asked, give me an impact estimation table with 10 powerful designs for delivering the 10 qualities, it does it, and it knows what it's doing. Okay, it can do the engineering design for a software or IT system. It can do it. But implementing it in code is a step I suspect it cannot really do. And but it's just, there's no reason why it cannot do that. By the way, we built such AI systems in the late 1970s. A guy called Lech Karnik built a tool which did this kind of quantified goals and quantified design, and it ran it on an Apple II machine in Forth. Okay, so it's nothing new that we can, language is so systematic that we can automate what it does. Okay, I've got details on that. Okay, so I'm gonna turn off my microphone, send a copy of something to Al or share.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, and I could relate that. Karen had a question. So about the template solution case study, Karen, I'll find that for you. But why don't you ask him your other question about Boeing?
Yes, well, I just want to say it's great to see your unabated enthusiasm for your work. And, I wonder, why and how Boeing went off track. We've heard a little bit about it, lack of quality process, but you were there. How did they stray from, what you did with them? You're on mute.
You're muted, Tom.
We don't want to miss one golden word.
There we
Take
go.
it from the top.
Yes. While I was there, we had pitched battles and wars with quality control inspectors, the old version, not my new methods, who regularly released engineering drawings on time. It's called dog date, due out of group date. They released it by the deadline, no matter how bad it was. And we had to fight, and I had to get support of directors like Ed Mack, who really were old school and really wanted to do this properly. And we had to fight the old culture who just was, measuring time or measuring money, but they were charged with dealing with quality, but they were cheating on it. So there's nothing new. The battle is old, and it looks like Boeing finally lost.
So they prioritize the on-time metric over the quality metric.
Absolutely. We were all very conscious of it. They were open about it. They really believed it was their priority. That's what they were told to do, and that's what they were measured on, and they hated us for slowing them down.
So how did that work through? Who did you?
We won. Two key reasons. We had I could check it. So when I walked in, I was told the following: the CEO of McDonnell Douglas told everybody that if they didn't get their quality right within 1 year, he would fire them all. That got their attention because he knew they meant it. By the way, 1 year later, he fired almost everybody in a big meeting. And he said, now explain to me why I should rehire you. And I asked Windsor Brown, who was my main contact there. He's at USC now with Barry Bain, who left us. But I asked Windsor, did our guys survive? You know, the ones who did the quality I was teaching. The answer was yes, all of our guys survived and got rehired. He was one of the ones I trained on my methods. So, you know, so there was a very dramatic motivation, like keeping your job, that got some people interested in finally doing the right thing in spite of the forces and motivations against us. But I really viewed it as a pitched battle war.
So it sounds like you still have contacts in Boeing.
Yes.
So what happened that got them to today? Just
okay,
your
now
opinion.
be careful. This is 33 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Most of my good contacts are retired, and
Okay.
I don't know what happened, but knowing the culture, the forces of evil won. We all know some of the history. They started putting in CEOs with master's degrees in business and not engineering. They're having heavy talks about the next CEO has to be a damned engineer, not a bean counter. You know, so we could say that, you know, that's a probable cause, bean counter in power, not an engineer. They had a lovely culture started by Mr. Boeing. Okay, but the bean counters empowered will destroy any company in the short term, any engineering company. But I don't know all the battles, and most everybody I knew is today retired. And probably can't tell me the last 5 years of the history. So I'm not the, you know, I could try asking, but don't really have it. Again, I have a paper that I sent to Al about this in depth, about the guy who the mafia bumped off before he gave his third day of testimony against Boeing. Okay, it's called Suicide something or other. Al, did you get that paper on Suicide Watch? Or
I got the
in
note. I'm
email?
not sure. I'll
Okay,
find it if I
there's-
don't have the. I did get the note. If I don't have the link, I'll
yeah,
get that.
you have the link in the email. I
Okay,
read it
I'll get
last
it out there.
night. It's it is very detailed about what happened in the culture. So I think it it will answer your questions very well.
Yeah, just as a note of reference, I'll be making a page that describes this and has these notes on it. We'll do that on an ongoing basis.
Well, thank you, Tom. Interesting. I had a conversation with someone in the entertainment industry, and he basically said, you know, it's the same thing. The heads are the bean counters, not the executives who, you know, had been previously head of the industry. So, tsunami.
Yeah. Right. No, that's I mean, I'm just thinking of Charlie Chaplin leading his studio to success, but he was actor producer.
Oh.
You know, he wasn't the finance guy, etc. Is there a question? Let's see. Okay. By the way, Al, there was something I was going to give you, and then I started doing it, and I forgot what it was. So I hope you help me keep track of what I promised. The Boeing case study. I can do that right now.
You were also talking about a copy of the competitive engineering.
Okay. But you have a copy of that digitally that you can give, right? And I'm empowering you to do it.
We'll handle that. We'll handle that. We'll figure that out later.
Okay.
Well, I had an interesting insight on this because I was at Boeing when it started going downhill as a contractor, and I know a lot of people who were there after I left. They were there, and I kept contacts. And what's interesting is when I joked about McDonnell Douglas taking over Boeing, of course, Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas. And part of the reason McDonnell Douglas didn't do well is they had a culture of trying to get, just looking at performance and cost without including safety. And, you know, the DC-10, when you study it, met the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. Like one of the main crashes that happened was because they had put the hydraulic control lines. That's, you know, they control the flaps and things on a plane with hydraulics because it's just too hard to do that otherwise. I mean, now they use fly-by-wire in some places, but mostly then it was always hydraulics. And one of the core ideas of safety in an airplane is redundancy. In fact, the Boeing 737 MAX's problem, besides a lot of nonsense, was they didn't have redundancy of the angle of attack sensor, which had they had that, those crashes wouldn't have happened even with all the other nonsense. But the thing with McDonnell Douglas was they did have redundant hydraulics, but they put them right next to each other. And the reason that met the law but didn't meet the spirit is hydraulics are a physical device, and when one fails, it can be caused by a failure of the fuselage, which is what was going on. You know, the rear door blew out, and that caused the compression of the floor, which cut the hydraulic lines where it got compressed, but only if they were near each other would it cut both. So what your reason for being, in a sense, is when that shifts in a company, it can be a disaster. And Boeing's was about making quality, safe planes. I remember when I got in a Boeing plane versus a Airbus plane, I'm talking like 20 years ago, I was like, well, I'm glad I'm in a Boeing plane because I know how these things are built. I saw in the factory where they do the wing tests, they literally put the plane in with the wings and they keep bending it up to see when they'll break. And on, I think it was, I don't know if it was a 777 or one of the planes, the wings actually went vertical. It did not break. So I'm sitting there and these wings are going up and down in heavy turbulence. And I'm like, I'm not worried. Nothing's going to happen. But they don't build it that way. When you shift your reason and you go after money, that's a cause. And we see this. And I think people, the reason I'm mentioning this, I didn't mean to ramble so much on this, but there's a reason I'm mentioning this. The thing with AI, I think, is going to be problematic because I think people are going to be looking at AI as how I can lower costs, not how can I get better products. AI has the potential for better products, but I don't think it's going to be used that way. And that's one thing that bothers me a lot. So I just wanted to interject that. Okay, we got 10 more minutes for questions. I'll give you 1 minute to figure it out, or I'm going to ask Tom one. Okay, so Tom, you do a better job live with this, and that's the issue of quantification. I know you've done a TED Talk on quantification, and I think your views on quantification are very, what's the word, opening up possibilities for people about how to see things. This is not measurement, but why don't you spend about 5 minutes on it? That's, I know, short, and I could find the TED Talk you gave if people are interested in deeper, but see what you can do in 10 minutes.
Okay.
I mean,
So,
5 to 10 minutes, yeah.
Well, okay, maybe not even that, but when I was a young sociologist, and the first thing they do to young sociologists, they give them Weber's books on suicide, where in the 1800s, he quantified people's feelings and reasons for committing suicide, like their feelings of being alone. Okay? I learned something, and I learned that no matter how soft it is, you can quantify it, and that is useful, whether it be for research or thinking about the problem or engineering or science or anything else. Okay, so when I started looking at, I wrote a book called Software Metrics, 1976, U.S. edition 77. In it, by the way, I defined Agile on page 214. You can buy a used copy, or I can send you the details if you're interested. So in 1976, I published 10 years of work I'd done on how to quantify all the software things, you know, like reliability, usability, and things like that, security. And so on my, I much admired a Lord Kelvin's phrase. If you think you know something about a subject, try to put a number on it and try to measure it. If you can, maybe you know something about it, but if you don't, you should admit to yourself that your knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. That got me started. Okay? In other words, if we cannot quantify everything really important, like the security or resilience of software, and I did send you the textbook on that, which you're free to share, Al, then you don't know what you're doing, and you can't know what you're doing, except in the roughest way. I can throw a whole lot of so-called security stuff and hope it works. You know, very crude. Okay. So I went on a search, and every time I encountered something that people thought was important, for example, some decades ago when the iPhone came out, suddenly people realized usability could make money. And they were not interested in usability before that, believe me. You know, it was functionality and no bugs in the function. Okay. Then I said, okay, how do we quantify usability? And it's amazing how many people will tell you they don't know, they were never taught, they don't do it. Okay. So every time I came across these things, I just started quantifying them. Okay. And what I found was there was no such thing as a value or quality that I couldn't quantify. Now, let me define quantify. To quantify means you write down a scale of measure, like miles per hour, bits per second. And then you put a number on how good you want to be in the future. Like, I hope my Tesla will drive 300 miles per hour. Okay. Now you have quantified. You have not measured. You might need a speedometer or other device for measurement. Measurement comes afterwards. So another thing I also learned that everybody confuses, and I did as a younger person, measurement with quantification. And it turns out quantification alone is tremendously powerful, an engineering tool, in fact, on helping you think about complex systems. And you don't need any measurement to quantify. So for example, if I say to you, I want to get to the moon and back in 5 seconds, I have quantified, and you know that no measurement will be necessary because I'm never going to do it in my lifetime, because there is no technology that will do it short of beam me up, Scotty. Okay. So that illustration shows the power of quantification to show us that our wish for the system is outside the state of the art so clearly that no device for measurement will be necessary. You know, did Tom get to the moon and back in 5 seconds? Is an uninteresting question. Now, I then learned, and I put it in you'll find it in the competitive engineering book in chapters 4 and 5, which is about how to quantify. I have a deeper book, which I'll be happy to send people to say, I really want to go deep. It's called quanteering. Quanteering. Okay, I'll give it to Al if he reminds me. I'll give it to you if you remind me. But quanteering is a recently written one of these books I write in the summer that says how to quantify absolutely anything that varies. It has to be a variable. I mean, binary 0 and 1, I don't really call quantification, although it is, of course, of a kind. But anything where we can put things like higher, better, not worse, anything where we can put adjectives like that is a variable by definition. And that means that there is opportunity to quantify it, even though nobody's ever done it. But by the way, I'll just mention a little practical project. There's a man called Jason Crawford, and he runs a little institution called rootsofprogress.org. You can look it up, but his hobby is understanding human progress through the ages, including inventions and engineering and science and all that. And to make a long story short, I was reading one of his recent papers, and I realized something. he does not quantify any of the measures of progress that he talks about. So I started building in language a quantified model of human progress. I'll show it to anybody who asks. Okay, I've shown it to Jason, and where's Jason on this? I thought he'd say, my God, what a fantastic tool, Tom, thank you so much. He said, Tom, I'm afraid that the model will never be able to reflect the complex reality. And even if we do show people part of the model, the simplification will be too complex for people to understand. That was his reaction. He said, sell me on this. So I've written an email, which I'll share you, of 10 reasons why he should be terribly interested in a quantified multidimensional model of the roots of progress. That's one of my, that's like last week. I do this several times a week with various things. I attack almost every problem by saying, what are the critical values, and has anybody quantified them? And if not, they're just bullshitting. And normally and predictably, without looking, they are bullshitting. They do not clarify their most essential ideas by their own admission. They will give excuses why they don't, like it's soft, it cannot be done, it's difficult. All wrong. Lack of education, lack of leadership. Terrible situation we're in. I'll stop there. Did I cover what you hoped I would cover, Al? It's a big subject. You're muted, Al. So
yeah, yes. Well, the idea was the intention was for. I remember the difficulty I had when I first heard you talk about quantification was I thought it was measurement, and I realized no, it isn't. And it's you explained that pretty well, I think. But I kind of understood it before, so I didn't know if anybody had a follow-up question. Otherwise, I think we'll wrap up on that because it's about the hour. Actually, one thing I would like, because this is not what I was intending for this discussion to be, but I like this format. I think this is a cool way of doing things, of going forward. Then you get to drive it, because I know you're really here for Tom, not me, and I'm not offended by that or insulted by any means, because that's good, because I enjoyed listening to this, and I do want Tom's work out there. So you can all send me feedback also if you like this, or al.shalloway@successengineering.works, because I think what we might do to put a little structure on it, but not too much, is pick a topic, but then have you all ask questions about the topic. I think that might be an interesting way to go. But I'm open for other feedback on that. Otherwise, I'll put this together. It might be a little, later in the day, because I've got some things in front of me, but we'll keep this going. It's about every 4 weeks, and sorry for some of the confusion. It will always be at this time, 9 Pacific. And I'll be sending notes out, look at success engineering. If you want to, most of the people are in the ACOP and the ACE, so you'll get a note from me on that. But otherwise, you can always join the mailing list of success engineering. So thanks for being here, and thank you, Tom. This is enjoy any time with you. It's always interesting and entertaining at the same time. So I'm going to bring this to a close now.